Greetings, this is Chris Ruby, the Nostalgic Catholic, with another Isaac Asimov short story review. This one is contained in the July 1956 issue of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. Now, just a quick thing, despite the fact that Asimov's story is clearly highlighted on the cover artwork does not in fact go with the story. It is of something else, and that explains it inside. Um, Cover painting by Chesley Monstroll. Pulling rocket into upright position for takeoff, blah, blah, blah. It actually explains that there. It's something else. It's nothing to do with the dying night, which, that's clearly an important story. It gets the feature place. Isaac Asimov, Dying Night. So, and it's a novelette, by the way. But, it's a fairly short one. As is typical for this magazine, there is no artwork associated with the story. There's a decorative little space filler at the end that has nothing to do with the story, but it's kind of neat, kind of cool. They don't have any real artwork to go with any of the stories. There is a squib, which of course is only in this original publication, so I can at least read that. It says, the earliest fantasy and science fiction exploits of Dr. Wendell Urth, The Singing Bell, January 1955, and The Talking Stone, October 1955, have taken the form of the inverted detective story, in which the reader knows all of the background of the crime, but must still cudgel his brains to calculate how the detective can possibly prove the criminal's guilt, or like they do in Columbo. Now, the plump and agoraphobic little extraterrologist appears in a true whodunit, featuring sudden death and theft at a convention of the solar system's top scientists. There's a rigidly limited cast of suspects and a rigorously fair set of clues, and you can reach the solution as readily as Dr. Urth, or can you? So that is true. We bring up Dr. Wendell Urth for the third time in all of Asimov's stories. The point of fact, there will only be one more, and that's quite a ways down the pike, actually. So, but we have this one very exciting and entertaining visit with Dr. Urth, and here's what we have. There were these four astronomy students. One was named Villiers, and the other three were Taliaferro, Ryger, and Colonus. Okay. And they were brilliant astronomy students, top of their class, graduating together. So much was promised. They would have graduated together. Villiers somehow got injured and got some sort of a heart trauma, heartbeat problem issue that basically meant he can't handle the inertia of being shot up into space. His life would be threatened by that. So he suddenly is earthbound, while his three classmates, they were like four good friends. They did stuff together, and they were all looking forward. And Villiers was clearly, all would readily acknowledge, Villiers was the most brilliant one of the four. He was the super brain. The others were, just good time Charlies. They do their stuff. They do it well and competently. But in the end, though they get to travel to space, now that people can go into outer space and go, visiting different planets and colonies and whatever, staying there and doing scientific observations of one sort or another. So Canis goes to Mercury, and Taliaferro goes to the moon, and Ryger goes to Ceres. Beers, of course, stays on Earth and becomes a school teacher, but also takes a little time on the side to develop his matter transference technology. He came up with it, and apparently he even demonstrated it to some sort of science professional who is also the organizers of this particular event that brings all four of them together at one time and place, obviously on the Earth, for the first time in 10 years. And they can kind of compare notes. Villiers was stranded on Earth, but he had done this brilliant thing about creating matter transference, which is kind of like the Enterprise transporter on Star Trek. Beam me up, Scotty, and all that. Okay, it's kind of like that. only he just did it with a mouse. He actually did move the mouse from one place to another, one part of a room to another, from what I gather. And this other expert by the name of Wendell, who, as I said, is one of the sponsors or organizers of this event that brings these four guys and lots of other scientific type people together in some sort of a convention of some sort. But Beers kind of resents the fact that they got to go out and travel to outer space and see all this neat stuff. Ryger on Ceres, they have a telescope on there that even though the Ceres supposedly rotates every 2 hours, I'm not sure that it does, but let's just assume that was the story. But by having 3 telescopes and 3 sets of everything on Ceres, there's always something that can see every part of the sky at all times. And then, and they don't have very much gravity there naturally, but they have artificial gravity. It's about 80% of Earth, so it's an easy adjustment coming from there to being on Earth. Taliaferro is on the Moon, and from there, of course, what we all know, the Moon has 2 weeks of day followed by 2 weeks of night, basically. So that's the Moon. And then Caunus is on Mercury. Now, when this story was written, it was believed that Mercury rotated as fast as its orbit around the Sun, so that other than the ellipticalness of Mercury's orbit, which would create some shifting around, basically 3/8 of Mercury's surface would supposedly never see the Sun and would be ice cold. It would be like a ribbon world. You've got this thin little zone where the temperatures could actually be pretty nice and reasonable. On the back, 20 miles towards the cold side, oxygen flows like water, and 20 miles on the hot side, lead flows like water. So, but in this little zone right in the middle, a very narrow ribbon all the way around a vertical circumference of the planet, you'd have this very temperate region that can actually be pretty nice. Except the planet is shifting a little because, like I said, it's got an elliptical orbit. It rotates at a fixed rate, but the elliptical orbit kind of means that the Sun's relative location, it will tend to move across the sky back and forth a little bit over the course of the Mercurian year. So these are the planets that these are, or satellites, or asteroids, a planet, satellite, and an asteroid, actually, respectively, that these people are stationed on for their various kinds of observation. On Mercury, Caunus is examining the Sun and watching the sunspots and the Sun activities and prominences and all the other stuff that the Sun does. And on the Moon, they're able to observe a lot of the inner planets, and especially the focus on the weather patterns on the Earth. And in Ceres, they're able to look all over the universe with this great telescope. Okay, so that's what they've been doing. They compare notes. But Villiers, he's got this great paper about how to do matter transfer. He built one, he demonstrated it to Mandel, and then it went like that. He could build another, but that would take time. And in the meantime, he's also written it up in a paper, one copy, no scans. And they visit, and he's kind of saying, I've got this really great thing, and it's got to be introduced. He wasn't on the schedule. Mandel had a time on the schedule. He would go on, and then as a guest speaker within his slot, he would bring up Villiers, and Villiers would talk about what he's got going and present his paper and its abstract as this complete wow surprise to all the scientists there. They were usually blown away by how brilliant this was and how great this was and so on. Well, that's what was supposed to happen. But he calls his fellow classmates. He's really excited. He wants to tell them about it, but he doesn't want to actually share the paper with any of them. So he just kind of wants to keep it secret, but he wants to enjoy their, I don't know. It's like he kind of wants to show off, but at the same time make them jealous. But at the same time, they're the only people who kind of were his friends. It's like he wants to tell them first. Anyway, the next morning, he has been murdered. And it all comes down to whoever murdered him took his paper, or actually chucked it in the waste can. And presumably, almost certainly it turned out yes, in fact, had scanned a picture of the paper. So Mandel goes around and gathers the three other friends of Villiers, and he's pretty clear it has to be one of the three of them, because whoever did it clearly wanted this paper for themselves. Maybe they bring it out some years down the pike and be able to claim credit for this extraordinary development. And so obviously that's the motive. Could be any one of them. How do we know who? And we don't know who, because unlike the other two were Earth stories, we had Wendell Urth stories we had before. We don't know who the culprit is until Wendell Urth unearths, unless we figure it out, of course. So it's a good little story. In going from the original text to the later copies, there's really extremely little in terms of the text. The blurb, of course, goes away. There was never any artwork, so that's a Knox mix. There's a very few very tiny punctuation differences. There's one place where like scopes, maybe telescopes, some kind of scope, go from being apostrophe scope in the magazine to just scopes without any apostrophe in the books. There's some places where dot 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 turns into a dash, or vice versa, or just disappears, and also give or take which place it came out. For this story, appeared in the book, was first gathered into 9 Tomorrows. It also seems to be the oldest of his stories to have been actually gathered into this book. So now we're getting into the era where some of his stories actually appear here. So that's kind of neat. But because it's kind of a mystery story, and it's a mystery story proper, even though it's set in space, it also goes in his Asimov's Mysteries. Any differences? Some of these punctuation variations are different. Asimov's Mystery is less likely to have either the dash or the dot dot dot. The original magazine is more likely to have the dot dot dot, and the 9 Tomorrows is more likely to have the long dash. The only other difference is there are 2 parts to the story. One is at this convention in the hotel they're staying at, where it's just Mandel and the 3 students, classmates, okay. And then there's a part 2 where they've all retired to the apartment of Wendell Urth, and they have the conversation with him. And so originally, they just, to set the 2 apart, they added the word part 2 to kind of set apart, okay, now we're going to Wendell Urth. They didn't call out part 1 at the beginning, however, we're just the dying-eyed Isaac Asimov, and the birds up above, and then we just dive in the story. In 9 Tomorrows, it's kind of made fair and reasonable by saying, well, what we really should do is have the be consistent. So there's a part 1, and then there's a part 2. Yeah, okay. And then finally it comes out for a 3rd time in Asimov's Mystery. No more part 1, and even part 2, they just put some asterisks in the middle to kind of separate the 2 parts, and that's it. That's how slight the differences are. So how about this? It's a good story, and how do you know who did it? Well, we could talk about that a little bit. At the risk of maybe giving away too much of the store, a spoiler type thing, let's just say one of the things that happened was whoever scanned the paper of how to do matter transference, put it on a little film. Apparently, the anticipated future. I mean, it's funny in a way. It kind of anticipates our technology today, where you want to take a picture of something to study it later. You get your phone and you go take a picture, and there you are, and you got a nice, beautiful digital picture of whatever something you were looking at. Students can just kind of see their professor put all these equations and stuff on the chalkboard, and they just hold their phone up and go click, and they just took notes for the whole thing. It's all there in one quick click. Well, it's the same kind of technology, except in 1956, Isaac Asimov is picturing these futuristic students' tools as being like film, like microfilm. So all of this would go on a little tiny piece of film, and they could develop it later just like ordinary photographic film. Okay. Thing was, whoever did the murder wanted to hide the film. He had to get it off of his little unit that shot the pictures onto the film. He had to take it out and put it somewhere. And apparently he was in the room. For some reason, it didn't seem reasonable for him to take it with him. I guess he didn't want it found in his own room. By leaving it there, even if somebody found it, no one would ever know who put it there, right? The other thing was he wanted it to be pretty well hidden. So he actually put it outside the window, on the windowsill on the outside of the building. Apparently wind was not a factor. But it was stuck like in a little crack in some place, the material around the window or something, which actually, here's the problem. The sun rose and exposed this piece of film. This is basically an undeveloped piece of photographic film, is what it is. And except for the tiny little bit that's kind of stuck in a crack to kind of hold it in place, I guess so it wouldn't blow away in case there was wind, is the only part that's discernible. The rest has been totally washed out, and there's no telling, it's lost. You can do a psychic probe if you know who did it, or psychic probes of everybody, but that's kind of drastic. And once again, you notice we have this little artifact known as a psychic probe, and it could in fact be recovered that way. And I guess the idea is it will be once you figure out who done it. So now the only thing left was who done it, and really the one real clue. Well, Taliaferro has a rather interesting theory, which it's funny as you hear him spin his theory. It sounds so wonderfully persuasive. He thinks that Mandel did it. Mandel is the only person who really believed this thing. He would have had the clearest motive because he'd seen the thing work. The other kids are hearing this crazy stuff. Do they even believe it? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Mandel, he knew it, he understood it, and he had seen it work. So he would have a lot more motive, and it would have been very easy for him to have arranged everything the way it happened. And Wendell Urth just punctures that so beautifully, so elegantly. You just kind of kick yourself and say, why didn't I see what was wrong with that? Because it really looked solid. It looked like that's what it was, but it wasn't Mandel. And for very good reasons that Wendell Urth figures out at once, because he's smart that way. So then we're back down to the three. Who done it? And it all kind of comes down to who would leave a piece of unexposed film on a windowsill. And it wouldn't be somebody who expects the sun to be rising anytime soon. Okay, I think that kind of lets out Riger from Ceres, because of course the sun will be coming around in 2 hours. I guess it comes down to how long can you expect that thing to sit there on a windowsill before somebody, maybe some police officer searching the room, thinks of, well, let's see if there's something on the outside of the building. Oh, look at this. As a matter of fact, they managed to find the thing among themselves in the room almost, right away. So that wasn't a very good hiding place, not only from the standpoint of getting exposed to the sun, but also from the standpoint of they managed to discover it in a pretty short time. Probably so in a police search if they brought in the police. So he was probably hoping that he could leave it out there for a little bit, maybe a few hours or something, which doesn't exactly pin it down, because, okay, if it's Mercury, you're going to have this long, the night side is always night. You can leave it out there for 20 years and it'll still be fine. Now, the moon, you got 2 weeks, give or take what part of the lunar night you're in. So probably on average, if it is dark out, presumably it is, you've probably got on average about a week, let's say, before you got to worry about sunrise on the moon. So you got a few days, and you're not going to want to be leaving it there more than a day or two anyway. You didn't seem to think of that. So apparently it nails it down a little tighter, I think, than this kind of rather vague clue really could. That's the only weakness in the story. So, at any rate, I don't think I quite gave it away, but it makes a good read, and it's really fascinating to watch the way he breaks down Taliaferro's theory about being Mandel. It sounds so wonderfully convincing. You could think, yep, that's it. Taliaferro solved it. we're done. And then Earth is, no one would believe that guy. Like, why? And then he tells you why. Oh, okay. So, anyway, this is our third Wendell Urth story, published by Isaac Asimov. Happy reading. It's a good story, and as I've shown, you can find it in a couple of, perfectly good Asimov collections. Thanks for reading.